In the brutal world of organized crime, punishment rarely looks the way ordinary people expect. Sometimes it is not a bullet. Sometimes it is not prison. Sometimes punishment is far more personal and far more permanent. For Evelyn Parker, that truth arrived on an ordinary afternoon in New York City, long before she realized how deeply her life was about to change. The city moved with its usual restless energy as Evelyn stepped out of the small legal office where she worked. The building sat between two aging structures in Manhattan's financial district, far from the glamorous skyline tourists imagined when they thought of New York. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag and walked toward the subway station. At 26 years old, she had built her life around responsibility. Growing up in a struggling neighborhood in Brooklyn had taught her early that nothing came easily. Her mother passed away when she was still in high school, leaving Evelyn and her younger sister alone with a father who was often distant and unpredictable. Money had always been scarce, but Evelyn refused to let that define her future. She studied hard, earned a scholarship to a small college, and eventually found work as a legal assistant at a firm that specialized in financial disputes. The job was not glamorous, but it provided stability. More importantly, it allowed her to care for the one person she refused to abandon, her sister. 19-year-old Lily Parker still lived in the small apartment they shared in Brooklyn. Lily was studying art at a community college, chasing dreams that Evelyn quietly supported even when the bills piled higher every month. Responsibility had shaped Evelyn into someone strong, practical, independent. But even the strongest people sometimes fail to see the danger hiding quietly within their own lives. That danger began with her father. Richard Parker had always been a complicated man. Once, years ago, he had been a respected accountant who worked with several investment firms across New York. He understood financial systems better than most people, and his skills had once allowed the family to live comfortably. But after losing several jobs during a series of corporate scandals he had nothing to do with, Richard changed. The frustration of losing everything slowly pushed him toward riskier opportunities. At first, those opportunities looked harmless. Freelance financial consulting, private bookkeeping for wealthy clients who preferred discretion, small financial arrangements that seemed questionable but not illegal. Over time, however, the clients Richard began working for became more mysterious, more secretive, and far more dangerous than he realized. One evening, while reviewing documents in a quiet apartment filled with stacks of financial reports, Richard Parker discovered something he never expected. A hidden account buried deep inside a complicated web of transactions. Millions of dollars moving through shell companies connected to private shipping firms and offshore banks. At first, Richard believed it was simply another example of wealthy investors avoiding taxes. But curiosity led him deeper, and deeper curiosity led to a mistake. Without fully understanding the consequences, Richard transferred a portion of the funds into an account he controlled, a small amount compared to the total, barely noticeable among the millions moving through the system. But the account he had touched did not belong to ordinary investors. It belonged to one of the most powerful criminal organizations operating in New York, an empire controlled by a man whose name rarely appeared in public records, a man whose influence stretched across industries most people never associated with organized crime. Adrian Vescari. Within hours of the unauthorized transfer, Adrian's network detected the irregularity. Inside a towering glass office building overlooking Manhattan, several analysts monitored the financial systems connected to Adrian's operations. When the alert appeared, they immediately began tracing the transaction. The trail led directly to Richard Parker. Within minutes, the information reached Adrian himself. Adrian Vescari did not react the way most crime bosses might. He did not shout. He did not issue immediate threats. Instead, he studied the information carefully. The quiet calm that defined his leadership was the same calm that made his enemies fear him more than any display of violence. Adrian understood something about power that many others never learned. The best punishments were never impulsive. They were strategic, and they sent messages that could not be ignored. 2 nights later, Richard Parker received an invitation he could not refuse. The message arrived through a courier who delivered a single envelope to his apartment. Inside was an address and a time. Richard knew immediately what it meant. The money he had taken did not belong to someone who would quietly accept financial losses. He spent the entire evening pacing his living room, understanding that whatever happened next would determine the fate of his family. Across the city, inside a private penthouse overlooking Central Park, Adrian Vescari prepared for the meeting. Adrian was known throughout New York's hidden criminal networks as a man who rarely needed to raise his voice. His reputation spoke for him. Tall, composed, and always dressed with quiet elegance, Adrian carried himself like someone who understood that real authority did not need to be announced. It simply existed. Years earlier, he had inherited a modest criminal operation from his father, but Adrian had transformed it into something far more powerful. Instead of relying solely on violence and territory, he expanded the organization through financial influence. Shipping companies, construction firms, private investment networks. Every piece of the empire operated quietly beneath the surface of legitimate business, and every piece answered to Adrian Vescari. When Richard Parker finally arrived at the penthouse that night, he already knew the outcome would not be good, but he still believed the situation could be explained, perhaps negotiated, perhaps forgiven. The moment he stepped inside the private office, however, he realized how wrong he had been. Adrian sat calmly behind a large desk overlooking the city skyline. Several of his most trusted advisors stood nearby, their expressions unreadable. The atmosphere inside the room was quiet, too quiet. Richard attempted to explain the situation. He spoke quickly, describing the financial confusion that had led to the transfer. But Adrian listened without interruption. When Richard finished speaking, Adrian simply asked one question. "How much did you take?" The number sounded small when Richard said it. Adrian nodded slowly. Then he leaned back in his chair. "For most people," Adrian said calmly, "this kind of mistake would end very quickly." Richard felt the meaning behind those words immediately. "But mistakes can sometimes create opportunities," Adrian continued. Richard looked up in confusion. Adrian turned slightly toward the men standing near the wall. "Bring her in." Richard's expression changed instantly. "What do you mean?" The office door opened. 2 security guards stepped inside. Between them stood Evelyn Parker. Her eyes moved quickly around the room as she tried to understand why she had been brought there. Richard's face went pale. "Leave her out of this." Adrian studied Evelyn carefully. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he stood. The room fell silent as he walked slowly toward her. Evelyn felt the weight of his attention immediately. She did not know this man, but the quiet authority surrounding him made one thing clear. He was the person controlling everything in the room. Adrian turned toward Richard. "You stole from my organization." Richard's voice trembled slightly. "I can repay it." Adrian shook his head. "Money is not the problem." He looked back at Evelyn. "Respect is." The people in the room watched carefully as Adrian made his decision. When he finally spoke again, his voice remained calm, but the words that followed changed Evelyn's life forever. "Your punishment will be remembered." He paused briefly. Then he delivered the sentence that would shock everyone present. Evelyn Parker will become Adrian Vescari's wife. For Adrian Vescari, marriage had never been about affection, companionship, or family. In his world, marriage was power. It was a signal, a calculated move designed to reshape the balance of fear and respect that controlled the criminal empires operating beneath New York's glittering skyline. And when Adrian announced that Evelyn Parker would become his wife, every powerful figure connected to his organization immediately understood the message. Betrayal would never be forgiven. It would be remembered. The decision spread to the underground networks of the city faster than any official announcement. By the following morning, the news had already reached rival organizations, corrupt politicians, financial partners, and every influential family connected to Adrian's empire. Most people reacted with quiet shock. Adrian Vescari was not a man known for emotional decisions. His punishments were usually precise and efficient, permanent solutions to temporary problems. But this punishment was different, because it was not just about revenge. It was about humiliation. And humiliation was far more powerful when it was public. For Evelyn Parker, however, the announcement felt less like strategy and more like the destruction of her entire life. The following days unfolded with terrifying speed. She was taken from the apartment she shared with her sister and transported to a luxury penthouse under the supervision of Adrian's security team. Her movements were carefully monitored, and every attempt to question what was happening was met with calm but firm reminders that her future had already been decided. Evelyn had never imagined becoming trapped in the center of a criminal empire. Only a week earlier, she had been living an ordinary life, working long hours at the law office, helping Lily with tuition payments, trying to build a future that felt stable and predictable. Now that future had been erased by a decision made inside a room filled with powerful criminals. And the worst part was that there was nothing she could do to stop it. Adrian Vescari was not the kind of man whose decisions could be challenged. Across New York's hidden criminal world, Adrian had built a reputation that few dared to test. He was known as a strategist who approached every conflict like a chess game, patient, calculating, unpredictable. While many mafia leaders relied on violence to maintain control, Adrian had built his empire through intelligence. He understood financial systems better than most bankers. He understood political alliances better than most elected officials. And he understood human psychology better than anyone who believed power came from fear alone, because real power came from control. And Adrian Vescari controlled everything, even marriage. The ceremony itself was arranged quickly, not because Adrian lacked resources for something grander, but because speed was part of the message. The wedding would take place at a private cathedral on the outskirts of Manhattan. The building had been rented for exclusive use, surrounded by security teams and armored vehicles that ensured no one entered or left the area without permission. Inside the cathedral, preparations were already underway. Rows of seats were arranged beneath towering stained glass windows, while armed guards monitored every entrance. The guest list reflected the true purpose of the event. This was not a wedding meant to celebrate love. It was a gathering designed to send a warning. Representatives from several powerful mafia families arrived first. Men who controlled shipping ports, financial institutions, and international smuggling networks quietly took their seats. Many of them had competed with Adrian in the past. Some had even considered challenging his influence. But today they had come to witness the consequences of crossing him. More guests followed. Business executives who secretly depended on Adrian's protection. Political figures who owed favors to his organization. Private security contractors who operated in the shadows of legitimate law enforcement. Every person in the cathedral understood what this event represented. It was not a wedding. It was a demonstration of power. And at the center of it stood Evelyn Parker. She waited in a private room behind the altar, surrounded by several women hired to prepare her for the ceremony. The white dress they placed on her shoulders was elegant, carefully chosen to match the grandeur of the event. But to Evelyn it felt like a costume, a symbol of something she had never agreed to become. Her reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar. The confident young woman who had once believed she controlled her own future now looked like someone caught in a story she could not escape. One of the assistants finished adjusting the fabric around her shoulders. "It's time." The words felt heavier than they should have. Outside the room, the cathedral had grown quiet. The guests were waiting. Adrian Vescari stood near the altar, his posture calm and composed as he surveyed the gathering before him. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he looked less like a criminal leader and more like a man attending an important business meeting, which in many ways was exactly what this was. Several influential figures approached him quietly, offering brief greetings and subtle acknowledgments of the message he was delivering through this event. Adrian responded politely but without warmth. His attention remained focused on the ceremony itself, because the real purpose of the wedding was not the vows. It was the symbol. When the cathedral doors finally opened, every conversation stopped. Evelyn stepped inside. The long aisle stretched before her like a path, leading away from the life she once knew. Dozens of powerful men turned their attention toward her as she began walking forward. Their expressions carried curiosity, interest, and in some cases, quiet admiration for Adrian's ability to turn punishment into spectacle. Evelyn kept her eyes forward. Every step felt heavier than the last. At the far end of the aisle, Adrian Vescari waited. He watched her approach with the same calm expression he had worn since the ceremony began. But as Evelyn moved closer, something about her presence captured his attention more than he expected. She was not trembling. She was not begging. She walked with quiet determination, even as the weight of humiliation surrounded her. That detail did not go unnoticed. The ceremony began quickly. The priest spoke the traditional words, though even he seemed aware that this was not an ordinary union. The air inside the cathedral felt tense. Everyone understood that this marriage was not about romance. It was about control. And when the moment arrived for Evelyn to stand beside Adrian, she finally allowed her emotions to surface. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She did not try to hide it. It was not a dramatic display of grief, just a quiet expression of the life that had been taken from her. But that single tear caught Adrian's attention in a way he had not expected. For the first time since the ceremony began, his focus shifted completely toward her. The room remained silent. The powerful men watching the event saw nothing unusual. But Adrian noticed something deeper in that moment. Not weakness, not surrender. Something far more complicated. As Evelyn's quiet tears fell beneath the stained glass light of the cathedral, Adrian Vescari felt the first unexpected crack in the punishment he had designed so carefully. Luxury can be the most convincing disguise for captivity. To the outside world, Adrian Vescari's estate looked like a symbol of extraordinary success. It sat on a vast stretch of private land just outside Manhattan, hidden behind tall iron gates and a long tree-lined driveway that separated it from the rest of the world. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture. White stone walls rose 3 stories high, surrounded by glass panels that reflected the surrounding gardens and water features. Expansive terraces overlooked carefully maintained lawns, while several smaller buildings scattered across the property housed security teams, private offices, and operational centers connected to Adrian's growing empire. To anyone arriving for the first time, the estate looked like a paradise built for wealth and comfort. But Evelyn Parker discovered very quickly that beauty could hide something far more complicated, something far more dangerous. The morning after the wedding, a convoy of black vehicles transported Evelyn from the cathedral directly to the estate. The journey passed through quiet roads that slowly replaced the chaos of New York City with silence and distance. Inside the car, Evelyn sat alone. 2 security vehicles followed closely behind while another drove ahead, ensuring that every mile of the journey remained completely controlled. No one spoke to her during the ride. No one explained what her life would look like now. But Evelyn already understood the truth. She had not gained a home. She had gained a prison. When the gates finally opened, the convoy entered the property slowly. Evelyn looked out the window as the mansion appeared at the end of the long driveway. Its size alone was enough to make anyone feel small. But what captured her attention more than the building itself was the security surrounding it. Cameras lined every corner of the perimeter walls. Armed guards stood at checkpoints along the driveway. Even the gardens contained discreet motion sensors hidden beneath the landscaping. Everything about the estate had been designed with a single purpose: control. The vehicle stopped in front of the main entrance. 2 guards stepped forward immediately, opening the car door while scanning the surroundings with practiced attention. Evelyn stepped out slowly. The cool air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass and distant ocean wind. From the outside, the place almost felt peaceful, but the dozens of security personnel, watching every movement, made it clear that peace had nothing to do with the purpose of this estate. The large wooden doors opened as she approached. Inside, the mansion revealed its true scale. The main hall stretched across 2 floors, illuminated by a massive crystal chandelier that cast warm light across polished marble floors. Elegant staircases curved upward toward the private living quarters, while expensive artwork decorated the walls like pieces in a museum. Several staff members waited near the entrance. They greeted Evelyn politely, though their expressions remained carefully neutral. It was clear they had been instructed not to treat her like a typical guest. One of them stepped forward. "Your room has been prepared." Evelyn followed quietly. As they moved to the mansion's long corridors, she noticed something unusual about the staff and guards who worked there. Every person she passed acknowledged Adrian's authority without hesitation. They did not speak his name casually. They did not question his instructions. Their loyalty felt absolute, not just professional, personal. It was the kind of loyalty that came from years of trust or years of fear. The room prepared for Evelyn overlooked the eastern side of the estate. It was larger than the entire apartment she had once shared with her sister. Tall windows allowed sunlight to flood the space, while elegant furniture filled the room with quiet luxury. To anyone else, it might have looked like a dream, but Evelyn immediately noticed the details that mattered more. The hallway outside contained 2 security guards. The windows were reinforced with invisible protective glass, and every door inside the mansion operated through a digital security system that required authorization to unlock. She walked slowly toward the window, staring across the vast property. Miles of trees surrounded the estate. Beyond them, there was nothing but empty countryside. Escape would be impossible. The realization settled quietly into her thoughts. Freedom was an illusion here. Later that afternoon, Evelyn began exploring the mansion's interior. No one stopped her. Adrian had already issued clear instructions that she could move freely within the house itself. But the moment she approached the front entrance, one of the guards stepped forward immediately. His tone remained polite. "Mr. Vescry has asked that you remain inside the estate." The message was clear. She could walk the halls. She could enjoy the gardens. But leaving was not an option. Evelyn returned inside without arguing. She had already begun to understand Adrian's style of control. He did not rely on threats. He relied on systems that made resistance pointless. Over the next few days, Evelyn slowly became familiar with the rhythm of the estate. The mansion operated like the headquarters of a powerful corporation. Visitors arrived throughout the day. Some were wealthy businessmen. Others were security advisors or international partners connected to Adrian's expanding operations. Each meeting took place in private offices located in the west wing of the house. And each meeting reminded Evelyn of something important. Adrian Vescary's world was far larger than she had originally imagined. One evening, while walking through a quiet hallway near the west wing, Evelyn noticed something unusual. A door had been left slightly open. Soft voices drifted through the gap. Curiosity pulled her closer. Inside the room, a large digital screen displayed maps and financial projections connected to several international shipping routes. Adrian stood near the center of the table, surrounded by several men who looked like executives rather than criminals. Their conversation was quiet but intense. Evelyn listened carefully from a hallway. Words like territories, alliances, and financial leverage surfaced repeatedly. Then Adrian spoke. His voice remained calm, but the meaning behind his words sent a cold wave through Evelyn's thoughts. "The Salazar network is expanding faster than expected." One of the men nodded. "They are preparing to challenge our operations along the East Coast." Adrian studied the digital map. "Then we prepare for war." The room fell silent. The word carried enormous weight. War, not a simple dispute, not a financial negotiation. A conflict powerful enough to threaten the balance of entire criminal empires. Evelyn stepped back slowly from the door. Her heart began to race, because she had just discovered something she was never meant to know. Adrian Vescry was not simply punishing her family. He was preparing for a war that could reshape the entire criminal underworld. And now that she had witnessed that secret, she was deeper inside his world than she had ever imagined possible. Powerful empires rarely fall from outside attacks alone. Most of the time, they collapse because someone inside opens a door. Evelyn Parker began to understand that truth during the quiet days that followed her accidental discovery of Adrian Vescary's secret meeting. The mansion continued operating with the same calm precision she had noticed before. Staff moved through the halls with disciplined efficiency. Security teams monitored the estate's perimeter, and visitors arrived daily to meet with Adrian in the private offices of the West Wing. From the outside, nothing appeared unusual, but Evelyn had seen something she could no longer ignore. War was coming, and the man responsible for that war had a name that echoed through the quiet conversations inside Adrian's empire: Victor Salazar. The name appeared again 2 days after Evelyn overheard the meeting. She was walking to the mansion's library when she noticed a large digital screen displaying financial maps connected to shipping routes along the eastern coast of the United States. Victor Calderon, Adrian's most trusted advisor, stood beside the screen reviewing several reports. He did not notice Evelyn immediately. His attention remained fixed on the data appearing across the display. Evelyn paused near the doorway. Something about the tension in Victor's posture told her the information on the screen was important. The map displayed several red markers positioned along major port cities: Miami, New Orleans, Charleston, and New York. Each marker represented a shipping terminal connected to Adrian's operations, but several of them had recently changed color. Yellow, a warning signal. Victor exhaled slowly as he studied the data. The expansion is happening faster than we expected. A second voice answered from behind him. Salazar's been planning this for years. Evelyn recognized the voice instantly. Adrian Vescari. She stepped slightly farther into the hallway, careful not to make a sound. Inside the library, Adrian approached the screen calmly. His expression revealed little emotion, but the quiet intensity in his eyes made it clear he understood the significance of what he was seeing. Victor pointed to the map. 3 more shipping companies moved their contracts this week. Adrian nodded slowly, under pressure. Yes. Victor tapped the screen again. And we've confirmed several political donors connected to Salazar's network have increased their influence in state transportation offices. Evelyn's thoughts raced. This was not just a criminal rivalry. It was something far more organized. Adrian crossed his arms thoughtfully. Financial leverage, he said quietly. Victor agreed. Salazar isn't attacking directly. He's weakening our foundation. The conversation paused. Evelyn realized something she had never considered before. The criminal world she imagined, violent confrontations, territorial disputes, was only a small part of the real system operating beneath the surface. The real battles happen in boardrooms, inside political offices, through financial institutions that quietly controlled entire industries. Victor Salazar was not just another mafia leader. He was building something that looked more like a corporate empire. Adrian studied the screen for several seconds before speaking again. He wants control of the East Coast ports. Victor nodded. And once he controls the ports, he controls the trade routes. The implications were enormous. Shipping routes connected countless industries: energy, construction materials, electronics, luxury goods. Anyone controlling those routes could influence billions of dollars moving across international markets. Evelyn slowly stepped away from the doorway. The information she had just overheard felt overwhelming. Until a week ago, she had believed Adrian Vescari was the most dangerous man she would ever encounter. Now she was beginning to understand that Adrian himself was fighting someone even more powerful. That realization unsettled her more than she expected. Later that evening, Evelyn finally confronted Adrian directly. She found him standing alone on the mansion's west terrace, overlooking the darkened estate grounds. The quiet night air carried a cool breeze through the surrounding trees. Adrian turned slightly when he heard her footsteps. He did not appear surprised to see her. "You've been listening." The statement sounded calm rather than accusing. Evelyn did not deny it. "You're preparing for a war." Adrian leaned lightly against the railing. "Yes." "With Victor Salazar." "Yes." The confirmation made the situation feel more real. Evelyn crossed her arms slowly. "You never mentioned him. You never asked." Evelyn looked toward the distant lights of the city. "Everyone in New York talks about you like you're the most powerful man in organized crime." Adrian said nothing. "But the way Victor Calderon talks about Salazar," she continued quietly, "it sounds like he's even stronger." Adrian studied her carefully before answering. "Strength is not always measured by reputation." Evelyn waited. "Victor Salazar built his organization differently than I did," Adrian explained. "He expanded quietly into legitimate industries before anyone noticed. Shipping companies, construction firms, financial consulting groups." Evelyn recognized the pattern. "The same strategy you used." Adrian nodded. "Yes." But Salazar began 20 years earlier. The implication was clear. Salazar's network was enormous. "And now he wants your empire." "Yes." Evelyn hesitated before asking the question that had been troubling her all day. "Is that why my father was targeted?" Adrian's expression shifted slightly. The answer came after a brief pause. "Your father was not my target." Evelyn frowned. "He stole money from your organization." "Yes." But the circumstances behind that theft were unusual. Adrian walked slowly along the terrace. For months before the transfer happened, someone had been quietly redirecting small amounts of money through several shell accounts. Evelyn listened carefully. The pattern suggested someone was testing our financial monitoring systems. And when your father accessed the account, he unknowingly triggered a trap. Evelyn felt a cold realization settle in her chest. You think Salazar set him up? Adrian nodded. Your father was an easy target, a desperate accountant with access to complex financial systems. Evelyn's mind raced. So my family was pulled into this war by accident. Not entirely. Adrian looked back at her. Salazar needed someone to create chaos inside my organization, and your father's actions gave him that opportunity. The truth fell heavy. Everything Evelyn had believed about the situation was shifting. She had spent days believing Adrian Vescari was the villain who destroyed her life, but the deeper she looked into the conflict surrounding him, the more complicated the truth became. Adrian had not started this war. He was trying to survive it. Evelyn stared at the ground for several seconds before speaking again. If Salazar wanted to weaken your empire, why target my father specifically? Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. That is a question I am still trying to answer. The conversation ended there, but the doubts inside Evelyn's mind continued growing. Because if Victor Salazar had manipulated her father into stealing that money, then the marriage Adrian forced upon her might not have been the punishment it appeared to be. Later that night, Evelyn wandered through the mansion's quiet corridors, unable to sleep. Her thoughts refused to settle. She eventually found herself near the West Wing again. A faint light glowed beneath the door of Adrian's private operations room. The door was slightly open. Inside, several monitors displayed financial reports connected to Adrian's organization. Evelyn stepped closer, and that was when she saw something that made her heart stop. One of the monitors displayed encrypted communications between Adrian's network and an unknown account. The messages contained detailed information about internal security schedules, financial transfers, private meetings, information that could only come from someone inside the mansion itself. Evelyn stared at the screen in disbelief because the messages were signed with a name she recognized. Someone inside Adrian Vescari's own organization was secretly working with Victor Salazar. In powerful empires, influence usually belongs to those who have spent years earning it. Advisors, strategists, and trusted allies shape decisions behind closed doors, while outsiders remain invisible to the systems that control everything. Evelyn Parker was supposed to be one of those outsiders. The woman Adrian Vescari married as punishment was never meant to have a voice inside his empire. But power often shifts in unexpected ways. And sometimes the person who sees the system most clearly is the one who never intended to be part of it. The days following Evelyn's discovery inside the operations room felt different from anything she had experienced since arriving at the mansion. For the first time, she understood something crucial about Adrian's world. It was not just about money or territory. It was about information. The messages she had seen on the monitor revealed a hidden leak inside the organization. Someone feeding Victor Salazar detailed reports about Adrian's movements, financial systems, and security operations. Someone who had access to everything. Evelyn had not told Adrian immediately. Not yet. Instead, she began observing the mansion with a new perspective. Every hallway conversation, every quiet exchange between advisors, every document left open on a desk. Her instincts as a legal assistant and the analytical habits she developed while reviewing financial cases began connecting small details that others overlooked. The mansion operated like a corporate headquarters more than a criminal stronghold. Adrian's advisors gathered each morning in the conference wing to review operations across several industries tied to the organization: shipping contracts, construction projects, private security services, financial investments moving quietly through offshore accounts. At the center of it all was Adrian Vescari. Calm, focused, always listening more than speaking. Evelyn began attending some of those meetings. Not officially, but Adrian never stopped her when she stood quietly near the back of the room, observing the discussions. At first, his advisors ignored her presence. To them, she was simply the woman Adrian had married as punishment, a symbol, nothing more. But as the days passed, Evelyn noticed patterns inside their conversations. The advisors often focus on large strategic decisions while ignoring smaller irregularities hidden within the reports. Minor financial fluctuations, delayed shipping confirmations, unusual security rotations. Individually, the details meant nothing. Together, they told a story, and Evelyn had spent enough time studying legal cases to recognize the early signs of manipulation. One afternoon, while reviewing a shipping report left on the conference table, she noticed something unusual. Several shipments scheduled to leave the port of Newark had been quietly redirected through smaller terminals along the coast. The explanation listed in the report seemed harmless, routine route adjustments due to increased customs inspections, but the pattern repeated across multiple shipments. Evelyn followed the data through the financial logs connected to the shipments. The same pattern appeared again. Money moved through legitimate companies before disappearing into offshore accounts linked to anonymous investors. Her mind worked through the possibilities. Victor Salazar's network depended heavily on controlling trade routes. If someone inside Adrian's empire was quietly redirecting shipments, it could allow Salazar to intercept valuable cargo without triggering immediate suspicion. The discovery unsettled her, but it also raised a question she could not ignore. Why had no one else noticed? Later that evening, Adrian found her standing in the library surrounded by financial reports. He watched quietly from the doorway for several moments before speaking. "You're studying my operations." Evelyn turned slightly. "Yes." Adrian stepped further into the room. "Why?" Evelyn hesitated before answering. "Because your advisors are looking at the wrong things." The statement caught his attention immediately. Adrian walked closer. "What do you mean?" Evelyn pointed to the documents spread across the table. "These reports focus on large financial trends, but the manipulation is happening in smaller details." Adrian studied the shipping schedules she had marked with notes. "Explain." Evelyn traced a pattern across several pages. "These shipments are being redirected to smaller ports where inspections are less frequent." Adrian listened carefully. "And the financial transfers connected to those shipments disappear into accounts linked to Salazar's investors." Adrian remained silent for several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. "I suspected something like this." Evelyn looked at him. "Then why hasn't anyone investigated it?" Adrian glanced toward the hallway. "Because the person responsible is likely someone we trust." The implication hung in the air. Trust inside Adrian's organization was rare. And if someone had managed to manipulate shipping routes without detection, that person likely held significant authority. Adrian studied Evelyn again. "You notice details others ignore." Evelyn shrugged slightly. "That's what legal assistants do." Adrian's expression softened just enough to reveal a hint of approval. "You may have missed your true profession." Evelyn almost laughed at the irony. Her entire life had been built around following rules and protecting clients from financial crimes. Now she was helping analyze the operations of one of the most powerful criminal empires in the country. Over the following week, Adrian began including her more openly in discussions with his advisors. At first, the reaction inside the organization was quiet disbelief. Several advisors exchanged uneasy glances when Evelyn offered observations during meetings. Others appeared openly irritated. One man in particular, Gabriel Knox, Adrian's senior financial strategist, clearly disliked her presence. Gabriel had spent years managing the organization's complex financial systems. To him, Evelyn was an outsider interfering with decisions she did not fully understand. The tension became obvious during one strategy meeting. Gabriel presented a detailed report about investment losses connected to one of Adrian's construction companies. His explanation blamed market fluctuations and regulatory delays. But Evelyn had already reviewed the financial records. She recognized the pattern immediately. The losses were not random. They were connected to shell companies moving money through the same offshore network she had discovered earlier. When she pointed this out, the room fell silent. Gabriel's expression tightened. "That conclusion is speculative." Evelyn remained calm. "The transaction record suggests otherwise." Adrian studied both of them carefully. Then he asked Gabriel a simple question. "Can you verify her observation?" Gabriel hesitated, and that hesitation spoke louder than any explanation. The meeting ended shortly afterward. But the shift inside the room was impossible to ignore. For the first time, Adrian's advisors began realizing that the woman they dismissed as a symbolic wife was influencing real decisions inside the organization. The realization made them uncomfortable. Later that night, Evelyn returned to the operations room where she had first seen the encrypted messages connected to Salazar's network. She accessed the communication logs again, this time reviewing them with the knowledge she had gained from the shipping reports. The pattern appeared quickly. Several of the financial transfers connected to the redirected shipments passed through accounts Gabriel Knox personally managed. Her heart began beating faster, because the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The messages she had seen earlier were not random leaks. They were part of a coordinated operation designed to undermine Adrian's empire from within. Evelyn stared at the screen in disbelief. If her analysis was correct, the betrayal was far worse than Adrian realized, because the man responsible for protecting his financial empire was secretly working for Victor Salazar. And if Adrian did not discover the truth soon, his entire organization could collapse overnight. Empires rarely collapse because of a single betrayal. They collapse when betrayal spreads deep enough that no one can see where the damage truly begins. For Adrian Vescari, that realization arrived the moment Evelyn Parker walked into his private office, carrying a truth that could destroy everything he had built. The night was quiet across the estate. The mansion's vast hallways were dimly lit, and most of Adrian's advisors had already left after the long strategy meeting that ended earlier that evening. But Evelyn had not slept. The information she discovered inside the operations room refused to leave her thoughts. Every financial report she reviewed, every shipping record she studied, every encrypted message she traced through Adrian's network, all of it pointed toward the same terrifying conclusion. Gabriel Knox was not just leaking information. He was helping Victor Salazar quietly dismantle Adrian's empire from within. And if Adrian did not act quickly, the damage would soon become impossible to reverse. Evelyn finally knocked on the door of Adrian's office just after midnight. The room inside was illuminated by the soft glow of digital screens displaying maps of shipping routes and financial networks connected to Adrian's operations across the eastern United States. Adrian stood near the large window overlooking the estate grounds. Even at this hour, he was studying reports, planning, preparing. He turned slightly when Evelyn entered. Her expression told him immediately that something serious had happened. "You found something." Evelyn nodded. Her voice carried tension. "Yes." Adrian walked toward the large desk at the center of the room. "Explain." Evelyn placed several printed reports in front of him. "These shipping records we reviewed earlier today." Adrian glanced down. "I remember them. The routes weren't redirected randomly." Adrian studied the pages. Evelyn continued. They were redirected to ports where Salazar's companies already controlled the cargo inspections. The realization appeared in Adrian's eyes instantly. That would allow him to see shipments without triggering financial alarms. "Yes." Adrian's expression hardened. "And Knox authorized those route changes." Evelyn nodded. "But it goes deeper than that." She activated the tablet she had brought with her. Encrypted messages appeared on the screen. These are communications between Knox and Salazar's financial coordinators. Adrian leaned closer. For the first time since Evelyn had known him, his calm expression revealed something darker. Anger, controlled, focused, but unmistakable. He's been feeding them information for months. Evelyn's voice grew quieter. Longer than that. She opened another set of financial logs. These transactions go back nearly a year. Adrian stared at the screen. The implications were enormous. If Knox had been working with Salazar for that long, then every major operation Adrian had planned over the past year might already be compromised. Every shipping contract, every financial movement, every alliance. Adrian finally leaned back slowly. "This is not sabotage." "No," Evelyn agreed. "This is preparation." "For what?" Evelyn hesitated. Then she answered, "For a takeover." The room fell silent. Adrian walked toward the window again. Outside, the estate remained peaceful beneath the moonlight, but the quiet landscape now felt deceptive, because far beyond the gates, forces were already moving. Victor Salazar had not been waiting. He had been positioning his pieces for the moment when Adrian's empire became weak enough to collapse. As if confirming that fear, Adrian's phone vibrated quietly on the desk. He picked it up. Victor Calderon's voice came through the secure line. Adrian. Adrian answered calmly. Yes. We just received confirmation from Miami. Adrian waited. 3 of our shipping terminals were seized this morning. The words settled heavily into the room. Adrian's voice remained steady. By who? Companies connected to Salazar. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. The war had already begun. Victor continued. And there's more. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. Go on. 2 of our political contacts in Florida withdrew their support today. Adrian understood the meaning immediately. Salazar had already begun dismantling the alliances that protected Adrian's operations. Financial pressure, political pressure, territorial pressure. The strategy was precise. Victor finished the report quietly. This is coordinated. Yes, Adrian said calmly. Knox opened the door for him. Evelyn watched as Adrian ended the call. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he turned toward her. You realize this before anyone else. Evelyn crossed her arms slowly. I wasn't looking for patterns inside your empire. Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. You were looking for the truth. Evelyn's composure finally began to crack. The weight of everything she had discovered, the betrayal, the expanding war, the realization that her own family had been pulled into this conflict by manipulation, pressed heavily against her thoughts. This never should have happened, she said quietly. Adrian remained silent. My father made a mistake, she continued. But Salazar used that mistake to start something far bigger. Her voice trembled slightly. And now people are going to die because of it. The words hung in the air. Evelyn tried to hold her emotions under control. But the exhaustion, fear, and frustration of the past weeks finally overwhelmed her. Tears filled her eyes. She turned away quickly, wiping them with her hand. I didn't ask to be part of this. The quiet admission carried more power than any accusation. Adrian watched her carefully. For a long moment he said nothing. Then something in Evelyn's words seemed to trigger a realization. He walked slowly back toward the desk. What did you just say? Evelyn looked up. I said, I didn't ask to be part of this. Adrian shook his head slightly. No. He pointed to the financial records she had placed on the desk earlier. You said your father made a mistake. Evelyn frowned. Yes. Adrian studied the numbers again. The small transfer that Richard Parker had originally made suddenly looked different in the larger context of conspiracy Evelyn had uncovered. Salazar had needed a trigger, a public justification for conflict, a reason to provoke Adrian, without revealing the real plan. And Richard Parker had unknowingly provided exactly that. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Your father was never the real target. Evelyn stared at him. What do you mean? Adrian turned the tablet toward her. That transfer was bait. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Salazar wanted me to punish your family. Why? Because it guaranteed you would be brought into my world. The realization spread slowly through Evelyn's mind. You think he planned this? Adrian nodded. Salazar needed someone inside my empire who could see things differently. Evelyn's voice became quiet. Someone like me? Yes. The truth felt terrifying. If Adrian was right, then Salazar had manipulated events from the beginning. Her father's mistake, the forced marriage, everything, all designed to create chaos inside Adrian's organization. Adrian walked toward the window again. Outside, the estate remained silent. But now the silence felt like the calm before a storm. Victor Salazar had already begun taking territory, and the betrayal inside Adrian's organization had opened the door wide enough for the entire empire to collapse. Adrian turned back toward Evelyn. His expression had returned to the calm focus that made him so dangerous. Salazar believes we will continue defending ourselves. Evelyn wiped the remaining tears from her face. But you won't. Adrian's voice remained steady. No. He picked up his phone again. This time his message to Victor Calderon was simple. Prepare the network. Evelyn felt the weight of the moment immediately. Because Adrian Vescari was no longer preparing to defend his empire. He was preparing to destroy the man who tried to take it. And when Adrian Vescari decided to go to war, the entire criminal world would feel the consequences. Wars between criminal empires rarely begin with gunfire. They begin quietly, with financial pressure, with shifting alliances, with carefully planned moves that weaken an opponent long before the first public confrontation begins. But once those quiet battles reach their breaking point, the violence that follows spreads quickly and without mercy. For Adrian Vescari, the moment of quiet preparation had ended. Victor Salazar had already launched the first wave of attacks against Adrian's network. Shipping ports once controlled by Vescari operations were now under pressure from companies secretly owned by Salazar's investors. Political allies who had once protected Adrian's financial routes were suddenly withdrawing support. And inside Adrian's own empire, betrayal had opened the door. The war had already begun. But what Salazar did not expect was how quickly Adrian would respond. Within days of confirming Gabriel Knox's betrayal, Adrian reorganized his entire network. Financial systems that once moved through predictable channels were suddenly redirected into smaller, harder-to-track operations. Contracts connected to shipping companies were quietly reassigned to independent partners loyal only to Adrian. The changes happened so quickly that many of Salazar's spies failed to understand what was happening until it was already too late. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The estate that once felt like a luxurious prison for Evelyn now operated like the command center of a massive strategic campaign. Advisors and security teams moved through the halls around the clock, while encrypted communications connected Adrian to allies across several states. Every conversation focused on the same objective: survival. Evelyn found herself watching the transformation from closer than she expected. At first, she assumed Adrian would distance her from the growing conflict. After all, she'd been forced into this world by circumstances neither of them fully understood. But Adrian did something unexpected. He began asking for her opinion. The first time it happened was during a strategy meeting with Victor Calderon and several senior advisors. They were reviewing financial movements connected to companies suspected of working with Salazar's network. Most of the discussion focused on large investments and political leverage. But Evelyn noticed something unusual in the transaction patterns. Several shell companies connected to Salazar were funneling money through construction firms that operated near Adrian's shipping terminals. She pointed out quietly. At first, the room dismissed her observation, but Adrian listened. He ordered Victor to investigate the connection further. 2 days later, Victor confirmed the truth. Salazar had been using construction contracts to position surveillance teams near Adrian's cargo routes. It was the kind of detail most advisors had overlooked, but Evelyn had seen it immediately. After that moment, Adrian began paying closer attention to her observations. Their relationship slowly shifted in ways neither of them fully expected. Evelyn was still technically Adrian's wife by punishment, but the distance between them had begun to change. Instead of treating her like a symbol of revenge, Adrian began treating her like someone capable of seeing the larger picture. And Evelyn, despite everything that had happened, found herself drawn deeper into the strategic battles surrounding the empire. Weeks passed as the conflict between the two organizations intensified. Salazar responded aggressively once he realized Adrian had discovered Knox's betrayal. Several Vescari-controlled warehouses were attacked during nighttime operations. Cargo shipments disappeared from shipping terminals controlled by Adrian's allies. The violence spread quickly through the networks connected to both organizations. But the most dangerous battles were still happening quietly. Inside banks, inside government offices, inside private boardrooms where powerful investors chose which empire they would support. Adrian understood that winning the war would require more than force. It required information. And Evelyn had become one of the most valuable sources of insight inside his strategy. One evening, as they reviewed financial records together in the mansion's operations room, Evelyn noticed something strange. Several companies previously connected to Salazar's network had suddenly stopped receiving funds from his offshore accounts. At first, the change seemed minor, but the pattern repeated across multiple industries: construction, shipping, energy. Evelyn studied the numbers carefully. Then she looked up at Adrian. "This isn't random." Adrian stepped closer to the screen. "What do you see?" Evelyn highlighted several transactions. These companies used to rely on Salazar's funding. Yes, but now they're being paid by someone else. Adrian frowned slightly. Who? Evelyn traced the financial path across several international accounts. The trail eventually stopped at a series of shell companies registered through private banking networks in Europe. The names behind those accounts had been carefully hidden, but one connection stood out. Evelyn recognized it immediately. These accounts are linked to political investment groups. Adrian's expression darkened. Not Salazar's network. No. Evelyn's voice grew quieter. This is someone bigger. The room fell silent. Victor Calderon stepped closer to the screen. If Salazar isn't funding these operations, Adrian finished the thought, then someone else is controlling him. The possibility changed everything. Salazar had always been dangerous, but he had never possessed the financial resources necessary to challenge Adrian's empire alone. If someone else was backing him, the war had suddenly become much more complicated. Adrian studied the financial data for several long seconds. Then he spoke quietly. We've been fighting the wrong enemy. Evelyn felt a chill run through her thoughts. Salazar was not the mastermind behind the war. He was only the weapon, which meant someone far more powerful had been orchestrating the entire conflict from the shadows. Evelyn slowly turned toward Adrian. There's another player. Adrian nodded once. Yes. Victor looked between them. Do we know who? Adrian remained silent, but the look in his eyes suggested he had just begun to understand something that had been hidden for a long time. Because the financial accounts funding Salazar's operations belonged to a network Adrian had not expected to see involved. A network connected to one of the most powerful political families in the country. And if Adrian's suspicion was correct, the real mastermind behind the war was someone far more dangerous than Victor Salazar had ever been. History rarely remembers the quiet moments that reshape powerful empires. People remember wars. They remember betrayals. They remember the men who commanded armies and controlled fortunes. But sometimes the moment that truly changes everything begins with someone no one expected to matter. For Adrian Vescari, that moment had begun the night he forced Evelyn Parker to become his wife. At the time, he believed the marriage was a punishment, a message to anyone who thought betrayal would go unanswered. But as the war against Victor Salazar unfolded, Adrian began to understand something he had not anticipated. The woman he had pulled into his empire was not a weakness. She had become the one person capable of seeing the truth behind the war. And that truth was about to end it. The discovery Evelyn made inside the financial records changed the direction of the conflict almost overnight. Victor Salazar was not acting alone. He had never been the real mastermind behind the campaign to dismantle Adrian's empire. Instead, he had been financed and quietly supported by a network of powerful political investors who operated behind legitimate corporations and international banking systems. Their goal had never been simply to destroy Adrian Vescari. Their goal was to seize control of the entire trade network along the eastern coast, the shipping routes, the ports, the financial systems connected to billions of dollars moving through global markets. Adrian had spent years building that network, and now powerful forces inside the political and corporate world wanted it for themselves. The man responsible for coordinating the conspiracy was someone Adrian had never expected to face. Senator Marcus Holbrook, a powerful political figure who had spent years building relationships with private investors, corporate executives, and international banking institutions. Holbrook had quietly positioned himself as a financial architect behind Salazar's expansion. Through shell companies and hidden investment groups, he had funded the operations that allowed Salazar to challenge Adrian's empire. To the public, Holbrook was a respected political leader, but behind closed doors, he was preparing to control one of the most powerful criminal networks in the country. Evelyn was the one who uncovered the connection. While reviewing the financial pathways linked to Salazar's funding, she noticed something unusual. Several shell corporations connected to the offshore accounts had also donated large amounts of money to Holbrook's political campaigns over the past decade. At first, the pattern looked like coincidence. But when Evelyn traced the transactions further, the truth became undeniable. Holbrook was the invisible partner behind Salazar's war. The moment Adrian saw the evidence, He understood how carefully the plan had been designed. Holbrook had used Salazar as a public enemy, a visible criminal figure who could take the blame for the conflict. Meanwhile, Holbrook himself remained untouchable behind layers of legal protection and political influence. It was a strategy designed to win quietly. But Evelyn's discovery destroyed the illusion. Within hours, Adrian began preparing the final stage of the conflict. The war that had started through financial pressure and quiet sabotage would now end with exposure. Instead of attacking Holbrook directly, Adrian used the same systems Holbrook believed he controlled: financial networks, corporate alliances, political leverage. Victor Calderon coordinated the operation from the mansion's command center. Encrypted communications moved through dozens of secure channels connecting Adrian's allies across several industries. Banking executives who owed favors to Adrian quietly began investigating Holbrook's offshore accounts. Private intelligence contractors uncovered documents linking Salazar's companies directly to Holbrook's investment groups. Journalists received anonymous reports containing evidence of illegal financial partnerships. Within days, the conspiracy that Holbrook had hidden so carefully began unraveling. Public investigations followed quickly. The political connections protecting Holbrook began collapsing. Investors withdrew their support. Corporations cut their ties to the companies involved in the conspiracy. Victor Salazar's network, suddenly stripped of its financial backing, lost control of several shipping terminals almost overnight. The war that had threatened Adrian's empire ended not with a dramatic battle, but with the quiet collapse of the alliances that had fueled it. Salazar disappeared from the criminal world entirely. Some believed he fled the country. Others believed Adrian ensured he would never return. But the real victory belonged to the strategy that exposed Holbrook's hidden influence. Within weeks, federal investigators launched corruption inquiries into several companies connected to Holbrook's financial network. The senator's reputation collapsed. His political career ended, and the network that once threatened Adrian's empire disappeared along with it. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere slowly returned to something resembling peace. The long weeks of tension faded as operations resumed across Adrian's organization. Shipping routes reopened. Financial systems stabilized. Alliances that had nearly broken apart were quietly rebuilt. Adrian Vescari had survived the most dangerous challenge of his career, but he understood something important about that victory. It would not have happened without Evelyn. One evening, several weeks after the final pieces of the conspiracy collapsed, Adrian found her standing on the mansion's west terrace. The sun was setting across the distant skyline, casting golden light across the estate's gardens. Evelyn looked different now, stronger, more certain. The fear that once defined her arrival had been replaced by something else: understanding. Adrian stepped beside her quietly. "You changed the outcome of this war." Evelyn looked toward the horizon. "I'll only follow the evidence." Adrian studied her carefully. "That's more than most people would have done." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried a strange calm. Finally, Evelyn turned toward him. "What happens now?" Adrian understood the question behind her words. The war was over. The reason for their forced marriage had disappeared. She was free to leave if she wanted. "You decide," he said quietly. Evelyn looked down at the estate below. Months earlier, she had believed this place was nothing more than a prison. Now she understood it differently. It was a world she had never expected to see. A world shaped by power, strategy, and dangerous alliances. And somehow, she had become part of it. But the life she once lived still existed beyond those gates. Her sister, her career, the future she had planned before everything changed. Evelyn took a slow breath. "I need time." Adrian nodded. "You have it." Months later, Evelyn stood once again at the gates of the estate. The same gate she had entered as a prisoner after being forced into a marriage she never wanted. But this time, everything felt different. She looked back at the mansion one last time. The place that had once destroyed her life had also reshaped it in ways she could never have imagined, because the truth was something she finally understood clearly. The night Adrian Vescari forced her into marriage, he believed he was punishing her family. What he never expected was that the quiet tears she shed during that ceremony would ignite a war powerful enough to change his entire empire forever.